Hello, my name is Dr. Lauren Brem, and welcome to the New Rules of Sex Summit. I am here today with Galen Fous, and we are going to dive into a juicy conversation about sexuality. Thank you so much for joining me.
It's a pleasure to be here with you and your audience and to share in this little or not enough spoken about sex in a straightforward way. So I'm happy that you offered that opportunity, Lauren.
Thank you. Well, especially on your subjects, your area of expertise. You are a kink positive therapist, sex educator, researcher, and author. So we're going to talk a lot about kink today. And I think that's actually a good place to start, is just that word, kink, BDSM, fetish. Can you just start by, clearing up terminology for people that don't know what those things mean?
Yeah, we can go into that because there is a lot of confusion. And also, there's no dictionary definition necessarily of these things. So some people maybe have their flavor and other people's have a different flavor. So at this point, anyway, it's not been clinically defined in a precise way. But generally speaking, they're all interrelated. I think kink has kind of become an umbrella word that identifies the kink-oriented sexualities, the communities that are associated with them, the activities that might occur. And of course, this is a broad spectrum,
Right.
That we're talking about. There's many flavors to it, but kink kind of has, I think, gotten established as that refers to all those other elements.
Right. When I think of it, in the kink community, they use the term vanilla sex. And I think of vanilla as being just kind of heterosexual, missionary style. Again, there's no clear definition, but this idea of vanilla versus kink. And it seems like kink is the everything else term.
Yeah. And I take things a little farther than that as well, right at that juncture you just spoke to right there, of vanilla versus kink. I look at it as, I say it as sex is friction, eros is myth. And kink is an eros-oriented sexuality. In other words, it's driven by archetypal personas, symbolic acts, gestures, props, tools, dialogue, body language, etc., and a mythic storyline that follows along. And it's also a paired dynamic in this power exchange. So like if you're a daddy, there's a daughter, or if you're a mommy, there's a son, bitch, cuckold, master slave, dominant, and all across the board. These occur in pairs. It's really fascinating just on that level, both in the unconscious, the collective structures of the collective unconscious has these pairings in the psychology, but also in the gene pool as well. That's why people are able to find and match up with these very kind of obscure kink-oriented identities, from furries and, it's fascinating if you get on a site and look at that, but that is the difference between vanilla sex and kink is you're engaging in much more than a 20-minute friction sex activity. So you're delving into this epic story.
Yeah, into these archetypes and these personalities. When I hear the word kink, I just think about, someone saying, ooh, that's kinky. And just like the excitement of something that wouldn't be a traditional turn on.
Yeah. And that excitement is activated by an authentic part within the sexual psyche. When somebody says, oh, that's cool, that doesn't just mean they intellectually think, oh, that's cool. That's resonating with some much deeper part of them, in my experience.
Yeah, absolutely. So how do kink and BDSM and fetish, how do they come together?
Yeah. Well, I'm going to add another one in there, dominance and submission.
Yes.
So one model that I use, that I've created to look at it is, and which I think makes an important distinction, is dominance and submission is one component, BDSM is another component. One is sacred, one's profane. And so one is in this power exchange, it's important to really recognize this sacred and profane side, because on the sacred side, which I put on the dominant and submissive side, this holds all the day-to-day negotiations, communications, care for each other's souls, Working to be present and embodied and transparent and authentic, having deep communication, building great trust and intimacy. All this occurs on the DS side of the coin first, because that then builds what I call a safe container to hold all the taboo, forbidden, inappropriate, cruel energies, that are part of BD. That's the BDSM part. Is the all of the shadow sides of our noble side, so you can be so if in the DS side archetypally, that's aspiring to the king or the queen archetype, as an example, the one that blesses, sets the vision, keeps order, blesses others, and can witness and see within the other what that person can't see themselves, and helps them elevate that up. That's the archetype of the king or queen. The shadow side of that is the tyrant, so in the inner chamber where BDSM can occur, that's when the tyrant come out, get the fuck out. I mean, just bring on this intense, inappropriate, impolite, cruel energies, which in a negotiated way can be very exciting for the partner. The partners go like, oh yeah, bring that guy. I love that guy. So that's the distinction between DS and BDSM, and how people can hold the paradox of, wow, how can I be a loving, caring, romantic gentleman and partner on the one hand, and being a dominant erotic sadist on the other, so I have to learn how to bridge the paradox. And this kind of structure helps people hold their relationship in a way that's not getting confused about which container you're in the moment,
So within this umbrella of kinky, we have the dominant submissive relationship, the DS, we have the BDSM, we could have, things that kinky sex that doesn't include that as well. We have the fetish realm. Can you talk a bit about fetish and how that interweaves in?
Well, I think fetish is a very little researched or understood aspect of human behavior, and it's gotten clinically kind of put in this kind of pathological paraphilias, or what they call them. So someone has a compelling sexual interest in high heels, say, and maybe they masturbate on them, or just have this thing. So what's that about? Well, obviously 50 years ago, well, that person is messed up somehow, and I think, though, as we project forward into this current time, let's take a look at it first. We don't know if it's what's going on, so let's just, instead of assuming it's wrong, check into it. So I'm going to refer back there. So I think that fetishes have been too narrowly viewed. So, for instance, someone who has a high heel fetish, I could understand in that of, okay, so that implies, so who's wearing that high heel? What are they saying to you? What are they telling you to do to the high? So in other words, I think the person is actually accessing. This shoe symbolizes their interaction with a whole persona and maybe a story that's going on that is driving them to orgasm or other deeper state. But it's not just friction on patent leather that's getting them off with a spiked heel.
Right. Yeah, that reminds me of someone I know who shared that their fetish for leather was because at the time women had leather gloves and they weren't allowed to touch themselves and masturbate. So in their fantasy, the only way to touch themselves would be that this gloved hand could touch them and could bring them to orgasm. And this was a fantasy since they were a very young child. And I thought, yeah, we talk about the leather, but we don't talk about the whole story and the whole fantasy of how the leather came to be such an erotic object. And I think most people don't explore all of the, or want to understand that there's so much more to there. And this is kind of a segue into what you talk about, our personal erotic myth. It looks like I've lost my connection with you. Let me pause this.
So the personal erotic myth is a model that I use to help people connect with, and I think it models pretty accurately what I experienced in nearly 20 years in the kink scene, as well as and how my work with clients and what they present is this inner mythos, as I talked about, that has the personal archetypal mythos. Usually the overriding dynamic is in a power exchange orientation. So there's dominant, submissive, master, slave, teacher, student, parent, child, teacher, on and on, in some sort of power exchange dynamic. So the individual often, and this is something that evolves for many people well before puberty, already in the Discover Your Personal Erotic Myth survey, which is about to become one of the largest research projects of its kind, focusing on the kink, on kink psychology, on the psychological dynamics of kink. In that survey, about 40% of the people participating report that they were actively engaged in their mythic fantasy or story or personal erotic myth, as it turns out, by the age of 10 years old. And they were masturbating, coming to orgasm. Maybe they couldn't ejaculate yet even, but they could still
or in sex play.
So this is like pretty shocking, really, because most people don't want to ascribe that children have any sexuality. And it's such a taboo topic that we don't, well, let's just check it out and see if that's the case. We don't even, it's so taboo, people don't even go there. But in the self-reporting of 40% of about 4,000 people, that's what they reported, that they came alive. In other words, this is related to the question, was I born this way or did the environment influence? And about 75% of people say, no, I was born that way. No matter what happened in their developmental years, that might have certainly had a strong influence on it. Mostly in the side of repressing it or negating it or keeping it hidden or secret, because the overriding overlay was, that's horrible, you're sick, you're disgusting, you're a sinner, you're going to go to hell. So people have kept this part hidden. That's why it's obscure even to the person often, because they've pushed it so far down that they don't consciously engage with it. But in those last moments before orgasm, if you think of someone who's not aware yet, in those last moments before orgasm, this is when the sex creature, as I call it, another word for one's sexual persona, because it is a very primal, instinctual, that's why I call it a creature. It has those dimensions to it as well. But in those last moments before orgasm, this is when it embodies. You might have been sedately, quietly having friction sex with your partner, and it's just kind of nice and going along, it's exciting. And suddenly, that embodiment occurs. And this is what the part that's coming alive is what it knows what it needs to get off to orgasm or to go to other deep erotic state. So that's where one can maybe get a glimpse of their personal erotic myth, is in those final moments, of this fierce embodiment, and also guttural sounds or actual sound bites that might be coming out, like harder or take me or something. Okay. So that's like a sound bite from the personal erotic myth,
right,
as I look at it. And that is, from there you can drill down. Okay, so somebody said, take me. Okay, so who's taking you? Where are you? What are you wearing? How did you get there? Is there any props or tools around those? So that soundbite is reflective of a much bigger story in the sexual psyche.
Yeah, and the power thing, the dominant submissive, seems to be so just so powerful in our human narrative and interactions. And
it's mammalian alpha beta territorial pecking order psychological structures already inherent in our bodies and our psychologies. So you see the gestures or the meat. These are mammalian gestures, basically.
Would you say they're a part of every sexual fantasy? Every arousal has some element of it, or?
Well, people can have, I'd say a large chunk, yes. I mean, people can have self-pleasuring reveries and different ways that it shows up. But especially if someone is what I call a fetish sexual, that is someone who's driven to orgasm or other deep erotic state by this symbolic, archetypal, mythic storyline.
Yeah, well, because we talk about a percentage of people identifying as kinky, and then a percentage of that identifying these elements in their early sexual lives, either through self-pleasuring or sex play as children. But I'd imagine that just being human beings. And since we all have this erotic story or myth and we all interact, there's no escaping power and dominance and submission. As you're talking, I'm thinking back on, okay, I could see, in that fantasy or that play, I was dominant, and this one it was a submissive turn on. And there were, I could sort of see who I am now as a sexual creature from some of those early experiences that I had as well. And I would think that no human is not a part of that. Would you say that's
well? I'm not going to say that because I can say I don't know, but I can say, yes, there are definitely a percentage that are structured this way. Their sexual psyche is structured that way. There could be people, and I've met people who seemingly don't. All they're interested in is, I'll say, for instance, there's the other side of the coin now emerging along with kink is quote unquote sacred sexuality, tantric oriented sexuality. This is people aspiring to transcend, their that personal erotic myth. It's universal. The ascent is universal. Up to heaven. They want to dissolve their personal identity, their ego, and such. Whereas I look at descent or kink is a descent. Down into the past, into our history, into our mammalian and even reptilian psychological structures and psychologies, which are still an intact part of the human species. We go through the development stages in both in the womb and in the life stages, recapitulating this millions of years of evolution from in the womb, where you have gills and a tail and covered in hair at one point. So these are the earlier manifestations of reptile and mammal before hominid began. That is in our genes. That's part of who we are. So we there also have the brain structure of those elements, and so therefore, to me, we also have the psychology and the body language. As I said, it's so evident in our gestures and all that level of the body's communication are inherent from our all these dominant and submissive posturings, and that's the mammal side is the hot-blooded side. That's where this ravaging animal, growling, biting, taking down energies can come into play in our sexuality that way. But then there's the cold-blooded reptilian, sadist, masochist, predator, prey level. That's an even earlier and a totally different. And somehow we don't know why these are blended into eros, and our sexual fantasies. Exactly. There's no explanation really why these things would be eroticized, but clearly they are, not just by a few kooks, but I mean, we're talking about hundreds of millions of people on the earth right now are opening to and are exploring and experimenting with some level of kink.
So you talk about, being conscious of these things versus unconscious. So what happens if we don't do that descent down into the depths and we just want to avoid it? What do you think happens?
Well, it's therefore put into shadow psychologically. So, it's like and once you push it into shadow, i.e. either trying to deny yourself, mostly you're trying to keep it hidden because you're afraid of what your partner, your family, your parents, your minister, your boss might say about, oh, really, you think about that, do you? So most people are terrified of anybody ever discovering. I created a psychological disorder I call sexual authenticity disorder. And that is the fear of revealing or someone else discovering the true depths and nature, frequency of what your sexual desire looks like. And so many people, the focus of the conversation right now has gone on to sex addiction, porn addiction, hypersexuality as this hysteric almost. It's like reefer madness level hysteria over sexuality, basically, about people are going outside of the norms, and it's horrible and disgusting. Well, what's happening as I look at it is we have an epidemic of sexual dishonesty going on in the culture. People are not people are afraid to be honest and transparent about their sexuality out of the fear of ostracization, losing your job, getting being divorced from, and all these things keep it in shadow, but when it's in shadow, it doesn't go away. It just kind of festers in the dark, and then it leaks out in unhealthy, dishonest, out of integrity, risky ways that are, it's horrible, the havoc we're wreaking on our being by being sexually dishonest and being afraid to talk honestly about our sexuality.
Yeah, when I was doing my research for my dissertation, I was interviewing men on their experiences with sex workers, and a number of them were seeing a dominatrix to express a side of them that they weren't sharing with, girlfriends or wives. And it's really interesting to see how some, coped by the secret compulsive behavior. Others would just eat all the time or work all the time or focus on the kids.
It gets channeled somewhere in an unhealthy way, unfortunately. When there's and the contrast of that is, I have had clients who worked with me, or I've worked with, who I've helped bridge that distance, that secrecy, and it's unfortunately, many people will go to their graves and never reveal the truth of their sexuality, and that's such a tragedy. And I'm totally fight against that. No, everyone has a birthright, a sexual birthright, to be who they are, and that's what I want to champion. Is yes, you're right to be who you are sexually when it's done consensually and negotiated way with a mature adult counterpart.
Yeah, and often I hear that sometimes the thing that's so difficult to be honest about is not even that big of a thing. I fantasize about other people, or I want you to pinch my nipples when we're having sex, or so they go out and do it.
That's so much shame heaped on those simple desires. I mean, I've had clients. And this is where there's an important part here that we're going to talk about in terms of the healing side. So getting into kink or any sexual authenticity is both a healing and empowering journey. On the healing side, as I started to say, often clients will, when they have an initial call, there's to check out, and we'll get to the part. So, what does your desire look like? And it's like, but it's like they're being choked as they're trying to speak their truth. And that's really what's happening physically. Is there's an embodiment that objects vigorously to their sexual honesty, their sexual truth, and is literally at their throat. The tension is so great there. It's like two things trying to get through the door at the same time. They're both blocking, even though the intention, the desire, I want to be honest, I want to be able to say it. Even when you consciously get there, there's so many psychological unconscious structures that have been around for decades that are not going to let you go easy. They will fight to keep you ashamed and afraid and under control.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting you talk about the blockage here because, I used to attend births and train to be a midwife. And what we tell women when they're trying to open their pelvis and get a baby through is you have to relax your mouth and throat. So this being cut off is the same thing as being cut off from your genitals, which so many experience with numbness and pain and inability to become engorged and aroused. And but it's so we say like, oh, let's just be honest. But I know that even myself working in sexuality, I found myself in moments where to share something, it feels so vulnerable and so shameful. So how do we actually get those words out when we're being choked back by, like you said, generations of sexual suppression?
Well, it starts with an intention. You have to first claim your birthright. This is your part. The individual's, the client's part is to step, I try to help them get their inner champion to step up and say, yeah, my sexuality has not had a full voice, and all you parts that don't like that, we're going to deal with you, but this part of me is we're making room, so that the individual wants to really just first claim their intention. Yeah, I want to be honest in my sexuality and express the depths of it in a shame-free way. So if they start with that intention, then when the shames, the fears, and in many cases, unfortunately, the traumas, people have been sexually traumatized, these are all stored in the body and the psyche, and they go berserk, like you say. People have retreated and cut themselves off from the feeling of, and that sensate level of their eros.
Mm-hmm.
So the path, then it's a practice. You start up on a journey, and it's developing practices to empower the desire and developing other practices to diminish what resists the desire, through rituals and symbolic methodologies that I help people with, because you're dealing in the mythic structures. This is an old ancient story. You're going to hell. Good girls don't do by that. When you dress like that, what's going to happen? Like, we're bombarded as children with this whole, no wonder we're afraid of sex. It's like we've been chastised and warned, and it's been vilified and projected off, and I call into what I call the erotic wilderness area. So like, this is we gaze out there, but we've been told, oh, that's where the boogeyman is, and you're going to die out there, and it's horrible, and you'll be ruined. So this is what has to be worked on. People have to step in to recognize, yeah, those voices don't serve me. That's not really what my intention is. And when you're going to get knocked off, inevitably, you're going to feel the shame or something because you went a little ways down the path. Kind of expect that. You can help properly prepare. Yeah, you're going to get shamed again. So learn to take a breath, prepare for the aftercare you might need after you stepped into it. That'll support you when those other harsh voices want to come in. Also doing body work, just learning to be present and embodied to begin with is going to help you relieve a lot of this inner tensions. But then there can be focused work, like we talk about the throat, someone who's restricted in the throat. You can start to do different massage techniques and things to kind of, at the physical level, loosen up some of that tension, which will also then correspond, because the body's the analog of the unconscious, and when you can operate at the body level to get rid of or overcome a lot of the story. And again, you might have to keep repeating these processes over and over while you're continuing strengthening the one and diminishing, and eventually you'll get more separation where you're going to be much stronger when those attacks occur. And you'll be starting to recognize, yeah, I do have the power. I am in my power. Yeah, this is what I want. This is my truth. This is when you can start helping the person really enthusiastically claim those things. That's where they're embodying it in an authentic way.
Right. I think community is so important in that too, to see, that we see things in other people and then it wakes up something in us, or it validates or gives us permission, and that, I imagine finding your kink community or a sex positive community, or, just listening to summits like this and listening to people talk about sexuality in a shame-free way. And it opens up something in you that can stand there if someone shames you and goes, what, that's disgusting or something, or I can't be with you with that. Well, okay, I can accept that, but this is who I am. And I, being able to navigate that, what can be really difficult conversations, or what might be surprising. They go, really, that's it? That's all you wanted to tell me? Like, that turns me on too. Sometimes it could be a different reaction we get than we expect.
Yes. And fortunately now there's so many resources and books, workshops, events, expos, all related to these things that someone who's at the very beginning can. There's a lot of ways to step in and start to explore that in a paced way, that you don't have to step right into something. You can just kind of get a little education, learn, see some people practicing it, so you can get, oh, I see what's going on. So yeah, if you're ready to take the journey, and there are safe avenues and venues and guides and therapists and teachers and books that are available.
What I like about what you talk about is so much of the psyche part and the archetypes and the emotions, because I feel like a lot of stuff out there, if you think, oh, I think I'm interested in kink and BDSM or exploring that side of my sexuality, it seems like it's more difficult to find kind of the meaty part of it. And I don't know, it seems more surface level things, but
because we're still at a very, this explosion of sexuality that's occurred in the last 30, 40 years is unprecedented in the history of civilization, really. And we're unprepared for it. The academic clinical models are way out of date now. Our dating protocols are way out of date. I mean, this is back to that conversation about, how do I talk about that? I mean, if you're in a relationship now, it's much harder. But if you're single, bring it right out in the first conversation. Mm-hmm. I'm kinky. I go to this church. Was educated here. I'm into this, etc. But start right off with it, or whatever the truth of your sexuality is. Find out if that person, otherwise you get in erotic mismatches. I mean, a lot of my clients are people who've been 20 years into an erotically mismatched relationship, and it's like, well, now what do I do? I've got kids, I got bills, I got this, we're connected. I actually love the person too. And, but they never had that conversation when they first began. And sex has been the bastard of human personality for thousands of years. It's time to bring it up to the table and give it its honored place along with intellect, creativity, spirit, and emotion. Have that conversation. Don't be afraid. You'll regret it later, even though it might be tougher to say right now.
Right. So one of the things I really think is incredible about the kink community is how they do negotiate, communicate. Then there's this word play, having a scene, and then the aftercare that you talked about. Can you kind of walk me through, like in a basic way, what those different stages are like? Because what I realized was, wow, I can apply a lot of that into my own sort of vanilla sexual experiences, or, negotiating with new partners, or negotiating something new I want to try.
Yeah. I think the kink community really has a great protocol that can apply to any sexual engagement, but, and it's an important one, particularly in kink, because of the activities that are going on, so the front end stage is just either if you're single and you're just looking for a quote unquote play partner or something, there are people who are open to play partners, will have their boundaries and edges. So in that the first stage is to get a mutual interest and discussion. Then in the discussion, people can state what their desires are and what their boundaries are, what their experience level is, any history that's relevant, physical conditions that should be known that could be relevant when you're doing one activity or another. And I add into that as well a building of trust and connection and some feel for each other, that you're feeling feeling what you're talking about. So that might include some paced touch, or just letting just your body and their body, put our hands together and just take a breath together and let some that is connection. You're not connected, now you're connected, so the bodies suddenly are, oh hi, can feel more there. So that front end is to connect, to get clear about boundaries, and to build a mutual respect also, and to talk about aftercare is often part of that. So then the next step, and this is where kink, and which is I've found it great that kink separates sex from just happening in the bedroom after you turn the lights out, which is a very ambiguous thing. I've had because I don't have sex in bed any longer. I have sex for 3 to 5 hours in a ritual container of BDSM, where this negotiated scene is going to go on that plays out, and then we go to bed and just cuddle and sleep. And because I've had it's so nice not to wonder when the guy crawls in bed, is he gonna is he snuggling up because he's getting and so it just eases. Then bed is just cozy and sweet, and we've just had intense sex in the ritual container. But in that container, it is the intention, the effort is to really embody. It's not role play as I look at it, it's embodiment. And the difference is role play is kind of a script. Okay, I'm going to do this, I'm going to say this, they're going to, where embodiment is more like maybe method acting, where you are What I look at is you're literally embodying the archetypal persona, of dominant erotic sadist, of whatever flavor that might be. The intention is that your partner wants you to bring that whole embodied, authentic, shadowy part, because they feel safe enough. Both of you feel safe enough, and you've built enough trust where even though the intensities and the energies being called up would freak the hell out of somebody if it just happened out in the world, in this protected, consensual, negotiated thing, the powder part that wants to be ravaged, that wants to be taken, that wants to be overwhelmed or beaten, flogged, caned, on and on and on, all of the things that can go on, can be fully realized and experienced. And in a way, I think what one effect, there might be many others, is when you bring the shadow into this contained reality, you're exercising it from your being. Right now, these same elements in the real world, all across the world, the world is awash in brutality, cruelty, sadism, suffering, people disempowered. And this is our everyday reality that we're running loose, not from a conscious, aware place, but these are all, all our wars and all our battles with our neighbors or communities or tribes are this mammal, it's all bullying, territorial, belligerence, and cops and students and teachers and parents so people freak out. Oh, that's about BDSM. How sick. Well, look at the world, people. I mean, that's the sick part. Kinksters are really just bringing this to a healthy place.
Yeah, and a consensual place. One of the things I've been shocked by since I started getting Google sex alerts for just to stay on top of the news of what's happening with sexuality is pretty much every single week in the news there is a teacher, substitute teacher, some teacher that has had sex with an underage student, and it is so prevalent. And I think, it's such a fun. It's so innate in us, and it's such an easy thing to play with a consenting partner and playing with age and all of that I think that I resonate so much with your message that if we were able to explore that, then it would not come out in these ways that then put us in jail and get us in trouble. And I think it's really, I'm curious for you, do you find because you have this safe container for that you do feel less anger in the real world, or is that really an outlet? Because some people talk about an outlet for anger being just exercise or hitting a pillow or something like that, but it seems like there's really a place to discharge that.
Well, I think that's a very individual question. I can't say everyone's experience would be thus. That's just kind of a theoretical that I've considered as going on, because I don't want to make that a statement that, take your anger into the inner chamber and let it out. Now, if your partner agrees to that, I love that angry guy, bring it on. That's one thing. But I mean, this is kind of a gray area, where what's therapeutic and what is just erotic, so you almost can't avoid, because the emotional contents of some of these places in the kink realm are really huge and are cathartic, therapeutic, whatever you want to call it. Someone is receiving a relief or a release, besides just sexually. It is emotional. I mean, the intensities that are being accessed in these erotic journeys are, as I said, way beyond friction sex. They are epic in their scope.
Yeah, and there are words for it, such as subspace, or what's some of the other terminology to describe that?
Well, you could say dom space too, because the dominant and both of you want to enter into that intoxicating level of the passions, the powers, and again, you're tapping primal, instinctual levels. Bringing the beast out. These are life and death, kind of energies that you're mingling there along with eros. I mean, that's why people are into blood and asphyxia and all these edge kind of plays are attractive and compelling, and people can learn well what they call risk aware ways. In kink, that's kind of a common term, risk aware kink, and that it's like bungee jumping or skydiving. They're not bulletproof kind of activities, but reasonable people can conduct them and take their risks and be able to have these thrilling and erotic adventures.
Right. That, and then they also describe with those really intense experiences that for days or weeks they feel this high or this new appreciation of life. Or
Yeah.
This
Yeah. It's a very enlivening, your brain, you're going so deep into your body. I mean, it isn't beside, most of us live from the head up, even when we're having sex often, people don't really let themselves drop into their body, but going into these excursions we're discussing, it is like as physical as you can get. And when you're in that deep into your body, you are at an altered state. You are in your animal instinct almost. You've eliminated your rational cognitive potential there and are just in this or such states. Now, there's another thing called sub drop, which I'll also include dom drop, and this is what I talk about when to be alert that your pre-existing psychological structures and emotional content that has vilified or shamed or judged your sexuality. Even if you broke loose and, here we went for the weekend and had this amazing thing, that coming week, they could really come back strong. And when you're in this more vulnerable state and really drop you deep into your shame or your fear or your, oh my God, what am I doing? I shouldn't have done that. Why did I, and so this is something to be both conscious of, know that it's probably going to happen if you've got a long history, and be prepared to do it. But that idea of sub-drop, I think, is a lot of people just that boomerang of the repressive aspects kind of hitting hard, because it is kind of, people talk about it as kind of a depressive state, and I'm just feeling empty or down or that. And so it's important that this is why aftercare, I call it afterglow too. So aftercare in the longer sense, but an afterglow is take moments to linger in wherever you went with your partner, rather than, okay, that was good, great scene, hey, just kind of breathe into it, hold on to each other, and just close your eyes. Don't have to talk, just linger in that energy that you've just generated. And then the aftercare is, well, it's whatever two people negotiate. There's no set formula for aftercare. Some people like just, yeah, okay, I'm good. 5 minutes later, hey, I'm good, I'm ready to go. I got to run. I got kids. They can be off that way. I think most people should try and slow that down. But some people, in terms of this aftercare, there's kind of a sense of, this is like big energy you need to be bringing, and for some people that can be the case, so that's why you need to be clear for yourself, and especially when you're the submissive side of the coin or the dominant, but maintain your own agency and autonomy, and be clear, like, so aftercare, I'm going to need 3 hours of you just holding me and rocking me, just if that's what your truth is, say it. Now the other person might say, I don't think I can take that on. Okay, fine. But so match up in both how you want to play and also in what you need as aftercare.
Yeah, I think it's interesting how sometimes after you just kind of are in that stillness and you're processing what happened and the other person is there. And then other times you like, I felt that I need to talk about, like, I just saw something in myself that I'd never seen before. And I need to talk about that. And I was I'm almost a little afraid of what I saw, but at the same time, like, that was amazing. Or, there just needs to be this. And I love that term aftercare. So it's sort of like not like hanging out to see, like, does anyone need anything? Or like, or it's really checking in with each other.
Yeah. And I usually suggest people take, besides whatever they might need immediately, have another check-in a few days later, that, like you said, because things come up, things you're processing still, and it might take a little while to sink in, but something really important might be there. So it's good to be able to come back and, when this was happening, be able to share with
Yeah.
someone what your experience was,
Right. And even
as
the
a way to be
bondage,
witnessed and such.
I was more turned on by that than I realized I would be. Can we do more
Mm,
of that next time? And
yes.
it just, I love how it continues the conversation as you're
Hmm.
discovering more. I really liked when you said that. Can we, play with that more?
Mm,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, I love too what you said about like going into the body. For me, working in mind body medicine for 14 years now, there is no separation of body and mind. So when you talk
Mm,
about like dropping into the shadow and dropping into the body, and I think about all the research we have now about the brain and how it's present in the heart and the gut and the genitals and the whole body, and that we're really like sinking into this full embodiment of ourselves, where I think
hmm.
we're I liked how you described too the difference between role playing and embodiment. It seems like role playing is like, oh, this is what I say now, and I'm playing this character, and embodiment is like that that sex animal. And it reminds me of when I was writing my first book, The New Rules of Sex. I was in Ireland, and there were all these farm animals around me all
Mm,
the time, and all these dogs running around the property, and I would just watch them be these little sexual creatures. And when the girl dog would want the boy, like she would arch her back and
hmm.
engage him in this dance, even though he was fixed. And then we'd watch all these different dynamics. The
Mm,
dogs were 69ing with each other, and I was just sitting there going, "This is the best sexual
mm,
education
mm.
about
Nice.
we're separate from the farm and the animals and all of that." And just to see how natural and normal it all was,
Mm,
and it gave like a permission to explore all of those things within myself.
nice.
Yeah.
Let me say that brought up too on this idea of embodiment. What that also includes is everything. It's not just. So, in other words, it's a creative space. When you drop into this embodiment, you don't need to know what you're gonna. That part already knows what it's gonna say, what it wants to do, how it,
Mhm.
its body language, its intensity, in any context that you might be in. So, I mean, that's why it's you can scene. I've been in the scene for 20 years, and it never gets old or tiring or boring. And I don't need to kind of, well, what am I going to do tonight? And this, I just, show up, and it's just, it's totally spontaneous and creative
Mhm.
in that sense. So people don't, when I just want to emphasize, when I say embodiment, that means the whole persona is included.
Yeah, the persona. That's important. That's really interesting. So, for just our whole audience really that's listening to this talk, whether or not they have any intention of exploring kink in their sex life, what would you say that would be something from kink that they could really bring into? I mean, we talked about it a little bit, but into dating, or talking about sex up front and finding sexual
Hmm.
compatibility. What would you say is a really important component to really access sexual authenticity?
Well, I'll put it this way. I look at there's 5 keys to integrating your sexuality into your everyday life. And that's first is sexual authenticity. That means know who you are, claim your own birthright, and explore that and really flesh that out so you know what you're bringing, and also therefore you'll know what you're looking for. The
Mhm.
second part is sexual honesty. Now that you know who you are, now how do I integrate this into my life in a way that's in integrity with my values and agreements and responsibilities? And how can I be transparent and negotiating and talking to my partners or potential partners about who I am?
Mhm.
And then the third part is what we call the empowerment, sexual empowerment. And this is what we just talked about in terms of being embodied, being present, being mindful, knowing where you've been wounded or shut down or disconnected, and the work you have to do or want to do to kind of become present. You can't get present and embodied in these things when you are still, when a trauma or something is so present that it's dominating your body and your psyche. So this is the place, but from wherever you're at, you can always start to grow and expand towards what you want. So that's the place to get to. But embodiment and empowerment is very important. The fourth is what I call the sexual shadow. And this is to be aware of, if you've been hiding for 40 years, 4 decades or so, be aware of that's your comfort zone. That's where you've been getting off on and in your little peccadillos. And ways, and just you need to be aware of that, so that if your intention is to be honest and transparent now, notice if, just like we have the shadows or the wounded parts that are, have energies about our shaming, our sneaky hidey parts, have their own little ways of operating in the world or being. So I say sometimes, keep your sex creature on the leash and know when to unleash and when to rein it in, is part of the action there. So this sexual shadow is just growing in your awareness and how you move your authenticity out of the shadow. Then the fifth one is paradox, and understand instead, we're in a monotheistic cultures where things are black and white, good or evil, right or wrong. I think we're more complex than it's more like yin and yang. So on this idea of the sacred and the profane. So in other words, a lot of people are stuck at the threshold of their desire because their two parts are in conflict. The part that, wow, I go to the PTA, I go to my church, I'm a solid citizen, I'm in service in the world, I'm very spiritual and holy, and I'm also really nasty, slutty, I want to get tied up. So how does that work, And many people won't go there because they've been told, oh, if you are this side, you can't be the other side. But the truth is, no, most of us are both of those, and we can learn how to integrate those two aspects in a healthy, conscious way that doesn't interfere with our humanity in any way. It also just enhances us because we'll be honest, we'll be more enlivened, we'll be more at ease, we'll be much better partners when we can be free in these ways. So don't get stuck on whether or not you're, oh, am I sick, disgusting? I mean, that's the messaging. That's not your truth. You're free to be your right is to be whatever your sexual authenticity is. It's yours. Claim it.
Absolutely. So I love those different steps of that process. So if segue into, for people to find your work, because I think your work and the writing you do and coaching and all that is we often need some hand-holding and some help and some re-education to look at that part of us that we've been, gotten that message is so bad and so, that we can't even look at. How can they find you? How can they reach your work?
Yeah. Well, I live in Portland, Oregon, and my website has just about all the information you could want in those regards of how I work with people, the personal, people can take the survey there. There's over 4,000 people who've taken the Discover Your Erotic Myth survey, and that is soon to be one of the largest research products on kink sexuality, with a research team that I put together is going to do a quantitative and qualitative analysis for peer-reviewed publications. That's going to happen by the beginning of June. So there's still time for people that they could take the survey. But the survey itself is a tool for individuals to drill down and get more in touch with these many aspects of their sexuality and the parts that hold their sexuality back. So that's a very valuable thing for the individual. But my site is galenfous.com, GALENFOUS.com. My book, Decoding Your Kink, Guide to Explore, Share, and Enjoy Your Wildest Sexual Desires is described there, and as well as I work with clients, but I also work with therapists who are looking for some insight or support around what they're encountering with clients that they may be dealing with if they haven't really discovered or explored much about kink psychology. I also have 3 classes on Sexology University and the Modern Sex Therapy Institute and another site called Kink Knowledgeable that are for therapists that in many cases offer CE credits that they can add to their needs in that regard.
Fantastic. Yeah. And I just want to stress to anyone watching that, I really seen that this work is not just for people that identify as kinky. As you start to look at these archetypes and desires and fantasies, I think this is what people are really lacking in their own, understanding their fantasies and being able to be embodied in their sexuality, because they haven't even opened up to looking at those. So I did do your survey, and I thought it was great, just being, kind of looking and being like, oh yeah, and just kind of exploring more of who I was, and giving me permission to fantasize and explore things either in my own self-pleasuring or with partners. And so I think it's a great goal. So thank you for everything you shared today, and everything you stand for in sexuality and this movement of authenticity and sexual honesty. It's so, so important. And I really thank you for your work.
Thanks so much, Lauren. It's been a real pleasure, and I bless you in your own good work you're doing. And we're kind of in the vanguard, and this is tough territory. Can be, because it's little understood, and not a lot is known. So the more people, and I really encourage anybody who can get on board in support of this, sexual authenticity and shame-free sex is really advancing the cause for all the humans to follow.
Yeah, absolutely. For all of humanity. Well, thank you so much. And hopefully we talk soon.
Thanks. Bye now.
Bye-bye.